So for everyone who didn't follow Katie's race, I just want to recap a little bit. So you beat a two-term incumbent.
Yep.
You flipped a district blue that had been red for a couple of decades.
Yep. The entire time the district had existed, it's been held by a Republican.
Wow. Okay. And you helped your party retake the House.
Yes.
So I think that this would be pretty impressive no matter what. But this is also the first time you've ever run for any political office.
Yes.
So take us back to the moment when you decided that you were going to do this.
Sure. So I was running PATH, People Assisting the Homeless, which is the largest homeless services organization in California. And through that work, I had the opportunity to help to develop and pass major legislation, especially in the city and county of Los Angeles, to address the homelessness crisis that we were facing. And so November of 2016, we'd worked for years to get this proposition onto the ballot called Prop HHH that would provide $1.2 billion to build the facilities needed to address homelessness, permanent housing, shelters. And we passed it with this huge margin of victory, almost 80% of the vote. But the very next day, instead of being able to celebrate this huge victory, people were in my office crying, saying, Donald Trump is president. We've got this Republican House and Senate that we know is one of their first priorities is to undermine the very resources that are so critical in the work we do, starting with the Affordable Care Act. And I didn't have a good answer for what we're supposed to do, except for to say, well, we have to work on the local resources. That's that much more important now. But also, the next thing we can do politically is to flip the House. So I wanted to be involved in some capacity, and I started looking into the nearby districts that were going to be targeted to flip the House, and it turns out the one that I've spent my whole life in, that I was currently living in, was one of those top districts. And I, had followed the race somewhat the last time around, and I felt very strongly that this is a district that could be taken by a Democrat, but it's got to be someone who truly understands the community, who really gets the nuances related to a district that is full of cops and firefighters and nurses and building trade workers, and so it's kind of has this conservative leaning tendency, but it's moving in the direction of being progressive. And ultimately, I was complaining about who was going to run. I was like, somebody has to run that gets this. And finally, a friend of mine who works in county politics told me, well, maybe you should run. And I finally looked into it and decided, you know what, if ever there was a time, this is the time. And if ever there was a need, it's now. So.
You mentioned President Trump, and I have to ask, do you think that his election has actually helped people who don't have a political background run and be elected?
I think absolutely. I think the fact that he was elected really woke a lot of us up, and women in particular, young women in particular, who said that this isn't who we are, this isn't who we should be. And we were really able to kind of capitalize on that energy to get people involved. And ultimately, it resulted in over 40,000 people who donated to our campaign, 5,000 people who came and volunteered just over Get Out the Vote weekend. So over a 4-day period, 5,000 people were knocking on doors for us. And so I think that energy that came out of the Trump election is what made it possible for us to be so successful.
Okay. So in addition to being part of the blue wave, you're also part of what people are calling the rainbow wave. And this is like the overwhelming numbers of LGBTQ candidates who ran and won in the midterms. So you identify as bisexual, and you've said that was something that sort of initially people told you maybe you shouldn't talk about as part of your campaign?
Yeah, so the fact that we come from this more conservative-leaning district, it's one that voted for Prop 8 in pretty overwhelming numbers just not that long ago. I had so many people who said, including members of different political bodies that I really respected, and even some of my own family and friends were like, you don't need to go there. You're married to a man, so just stay quiet about it. And I said that's just not who I am, and I think that in a position like this, I have to make visibility is something that I think is so important to our community, and showing that this should not be an issue, that people are held back from running for something or leading or whatever, and so I just kind of did it very casually, of just like, yeah, this is who I am. It was on the website, not really like making a thing of it, but then people started to notice, and it became more and more of an issue. And it didn't matter. I mean, we won by 9 points, so.
What kind of, all right, yes. What kind of reaction did you get from the LGBTQ community, especially after you've been elected, not your constituents particularly?
There's so much support and excitement, and some of the groups that were so critical to boots on the ground and helping us get elected were LGBT groups that, representation is such an important part of any community, and this is one that has been underrepresented, especially in the political sphere. And I think the fact that, and there's actually a few of us who came from these red to blue seats, these districts that people perceive as more conservative, that are members of the LGBTQ community. And I think that this is really powerful, a powerful signal to say that our country's changing and that you can be who you are, even if it's an area that's normally not been the case.
Something that has come up repeatedly in the press reports about you is that you're a millennial.
Yes.
You were part of a Vice documentary called The Most Millennial Campaign Ever, and everyone seems to be really obsessed with the fact that you're a millennial. Do you welcome that focus? Do you think it's important to be representing millennials as a politician?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when I started campaigning, I learned, and this was before Connor Lamb got elected, and so there were only 4 members of Congress who were millennial. And we make up the largest voting bloc in the entire country right now. And that to me is just this disparity that was completely unacceptable, especially when you're talking about what are the issues that impact our generation. And those are the ones that we're going to be facing collectively for decades and generations to come. And college debt, caring about whether we're going to have a planet, healthcare, housing, and being able to enter into this stable kind of American dream idea that has become harder and harder for so many of us to achieve. And just again, going back to that whole concept of representation, I felt strongly that as I'm going to be representative of women, I'm going to be representative of this generation, I'm going to be representative of people who aren't independently wealthy, don't come from political backgrounds, but who deserve a seat at the table in how our country's run. And so I just felt like if we were to define my campaign in any particular way, it's about being a voice for these communities that haven't had one before.
There's also this moment in one of those documentaries where you're preparing for a debate and you're anticipating that you're going to be criticized for your resting bitch face. I assume everyone knows what that is. Raise your hand if you have it. So you were kind of joking in that moment, but also I think it's indicative of some of the things women have to think about when they campaign. So can you talk about that being part of this wave of women and what sexism, if any, you feel like you've faced along
Oh my gosh,
the way?
yeah.
Big question, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And, as somebody who has, again, I'm young, I'm working in the LA area, in the nonprofit sphere, I felt like in my career I had not been held back in any way because of my gender. And I felt like, it just didn't really, I felt like in so many ways we'd moved beyond kind of the sexism that women who were even just a decade older than me had faced, especially in the workplace. I could not have been more wrong. I really figured that out once I entered the political sphere, and it started by people saying that, you seem like a great candidate, but I just don't think a woman can beat Steve Knight. We had, constant kind of feedback, let's put it that way, about my hair, my makeup, my clothes, my shoes. And that it's just something that comes for women that you don't get if you're a man. And even my age and my experience, the person I was running against in the primary was just a couple years older than me, but he never was asked about, well, why are you jumping the line? Why didn't you run for state or local office first? And and then talking about, well, she's great, but I just don't think she has enough experience. And it's like, well, my experience is more than what his was. So anyway, those kinds of things that you get as a woman are just nonstop. And on top of that, you have kind of the really nasty stuff that you hear, that you get on social media. And I had to get a restraining order against somebody during the campaign. And so yeah, it's a lot, and it made it even more important for me as I was moving into office of say I have to be a voice for women and the equality issues that we've taken for granted.
I'm going to come to you guys for questions in a minute, so if you have them for Katie, start thinking about them. But So you've spent a lot of your time since you were elected the last few weeks in various sort of congressional boot camps and trainings. What's been the most surprising part about that now that you're actually elected?
Yeah, so I think the surprise that I've really walked away with the most is that we really are at a historical point and a moment where things can change in a massive way. So within the freshman class, the incoming group of Democrats, there are 63 of us, I think it might have gotten up to 65, roughly that, that are coming in for the first time, and that makes up a quarter of the Democratic caucus. That's 1 in 4 people who are in Congress on the Democratic side are new. And that gives you an opportunity to change things. And we're coming in there. I think there are 40 people in the House now who have said that they're not taking corporate PAC money, not because we have a problem with corporations, but because we think that people should have an equal say at the table, whether or not you can pay to be there. And the vast majority of the people who are making those kinds of shifts are from this freshman class. And leadership has been really welcoming to us and has given us a seat at the table and has made it clear that our voices matter and we're not just being pushed aside saying, oh, you're new, kind of be quiet over there. It's the exact opposite. So.
Okay. Let's see, do we have any questions for Katie? Okay, we have one right here in the front, if you could just wait for the paddle.
Hi, Erin from Silicon Valley Bank. I live in San Francisco, so congratulations.
Thank you.
You just mentioned the stream of feedbacks that you received because you're a woman. Yep. How did you respond to them, and how did you fight against so that they will not have that against you?
So I think my approach just generally has been a couple things. One is to call attention to it, because I think too many people don't realize how entrenched this sexism is, including myself beforehand. And saying, like, these are the things that are happening. And we did this kind of video about sexist comments that we'd gotten in our emails, and I think just again saying that this is happening and this is very real and it's not something that has gone away. Is an important part of the way that I've responded to these things. But I also think, you can't let them get to you, and that's on all of us to do on a personal basis. We just have to keep moving on because it's not gonna stop. And if you let it really get under your skin, then it's just gonna hold you back. So I knew other candidates who had a harder time with that. So your social media and the things that you get online, the emails you get, like they're awful, and you just have to be like, I got rid of all of my social media accounts personally because you just can't be around that. And one of the biggest challenges that I've had is trying to keep my mother off of seeing those online.
Tough one.
But I think, and I do think that just being there and not being fazed by it and showing that you're competent and you're here to make a difference, and that none of those kind of preconceived notions are going to be holding you back is how we kind of change things.
I have a legislative question for you. You joined this list of 45 of your fellow freshmen. They wrote a letter essentially to the leadership of the party saying, we want to prioritize legislation, and ideally bipartisan legislation, over investigating the Trump administration. And I'm sure there are some voters that think that that is a great idea, and then I think probably from your party there are certain people that feel like any compromise, any capitulation to the GOP is essentially like betraying the resistance, I guess. So can you talk about how you respond to people that might feel that way and how you balance those things?
Yeah, I mean, my response is that we have a constitutional obligation as members of Congress to be a check on the executive branch. And that, frankly, has not been fulfilled by the Republican Congress that's been in place right now. So we need to do that. We have to execute our duties. But at the same time, I really don't think that should be taking all of the wind out of the conversation on these other issues that people are facing in their day-to-day lives. I mean, the issue on the campaign trail that so many of us ran on and that we heard over and over again about people hurting right now is about the cost of healthcare and prescription drugs, and making sure that they're able to access care and not falling out of the system. So if we ignore that to just spend all of our time responding to the president or investigating, just not, it's not serving the people that we were elected to serve. And so I think that was the point of our message, was saying, yes, let's do this. We have to do this. We've got an oversight committee. We've got, the mechanisms in place to really do what we're supposed to be doing as Congress. But also, we can't let these other priorities fall by the wayside.
And I mean, just given the reality that the Democrats now control the House, but you're still looking at a Republican-controlled Senate, the presidency, we've seen politics be so divided lately. How realistic do you think it is to actually find those places of compromise and actually get that legislation passed?
Yeah, so I also think that, there's this kind of bad connotation to the word compromise, and I don't think that we're approaching it from that way. Like, we're standing on our principles. We know what's right from wrong and what is important for our communities, and we're going to basically push that in every possible way, with the recognition that the only way to really do that is through these pieces of legislation that kind of have to be passed, and that we have to get support from both sides to pass. So, for example, the defense authorization, the appropriations bills, the farm bill, and so inserting pieces that are important to our values and important to the work that we're supposed to be doing into those pieces of legislation, the must-pass pieces of legislation, is going to be an important way that we sort of use our leverage. But the other part is that, for example, gun reform and making sure that we're keeping our communities safe, that's an issue that was incredibly important to the base that elected us and made us in the majority. So, and
can I just point out, interestingly, Katie is a gun owner and supportive of the Second Amendment, but also gun control.
And so coming in and saying, like, this is a priority that we can't let fall behind, and the vast majority of Americans agree with 100% universal background checks, with closing loopholes for domestic abusers, and there are these basic things that we should have passed so long ago, and we're going to bring up as the House. We will pass it as the House, and then it's on everybody who's been recently activated as an activist and as somebody who's engaged in the political process to put the pressure on the Senate and make sure that they take it up, and to put the pressure on the president to make sure that he signs it, because there is no reason not to. It's just a matter of us making sure that there's that political will.
We just have a few seconds left, but I can't let you go without asking. So I've been following a lot of the new House members on Instagram, social media, and I have humongous FOMO. Like, it seems like you guys are having a great time. What's it like to be part of that community, especially of women coming into that?
It is amazing. I think that that's probably the most exciting part, is coming in and immediately making friends with these people who have gone through similar life experiences, who have experienced the same kinds of things on the campaign trail. Like, my roommate is another 31-year-old who was elected to Congress. You have to have roommates, by the way, in Ford housing. And it's legitimately kind of like a college experience in so many ways, and that's a first time ever, because there are so many of us who are young. There are so many women, and that's part of why I feel so much potential for the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.